our collective West. The transatlantic relationship, our NATO allies, certainly the United States under the Biden administration, got a little too comfortable with censoring rather than engaging with a diverse array of opinions. So that's been my view. Obviously, I've raised some criticism and concerns about our friends on this side of the Atlantic, but the thing that I'd say to the people of England or to anybody else, to David, is many of the things that I worry most about were happening in the United States from 2020 to 2024. I just don't want other countries to follow us down what I think was a very dark path under the Biden administration.
I think it's important to remember what the House Judiciary Committee did last Congress. We investigated our government, the Biden administration, their attacks on free expression here in the United States. What Michael Schellenberger journalists called the censorship industrial complex. Big government, big tech, big media, big academia, all working together to censor Americans. And we learned all kinds of things in that investigation. We learned on April 27th of 2022 that the Biden administration had established a disinformation governance board. That's right, a bunch of bureaucrats going to get together and tell you what you can say, what you can tweet, what you can post, what you can read, what's misinformation, what's disinformation, and the new term they come up, what's malinformation. Thank goodness, because many of us raised concerns about that, they disbanded that disinformation governance board. We no longer had that. We heard from journalists like Mr. Schellenberger, like Matt Taibbi regarding the Twitter files. We heard from Tulsi Gabbard. We heard from RFK Jr., all Democrats, frankly. In fact, I took some heat for that. What are you doing bringing Democrats in front of the judiciary? We brought them in because they care about the First Amendment. It was interesting. When RFK Jr. came in to testify, the Democrats actually made a motion to go to executive session. Kick everyone out. No journalists, no one was allowed. They wanted to kick everyone out, go to executive session so no one could hear what RFK Jr. was going to testify to in a hearing on censorship. You can't make this stuff up. We learned that on January 23rd. Oh, think about that, by the way. We learned on January 23rd, 2021, maybe point this one out first, that there was an email. So the third day of the Biden administration, there was an email sent from the White House to Twitter which said, take down this tweet ASAP. And who had issued the tweet? Who had put out the tweet? RFK Jr. So you had the Biden administration trying to censor a fellow Democrat who was going to run against him in the Democrat primary. I mean, and everything in that tweet actually were true statements. So we learned all that last year, and of course our investigation culminated with a letter from Mr. Zuckerberg on August 26, 2024 last year, where he said, yes, the Biden administration pressured us to censor. We did it, we're sorry, and we won't do it again. On August 12th of last year, Thierry Breton wrote Elon Musk a letter. Thierry Breton's the commissioner in charge of enforcement of the Digital Services Act and the Digital Marketing Act. In the very first sentence, the guy in charge of enforcing this legislation passed by the EU writes this: Dear Mr. Musk, I am writing to you in the context of recent events in the United Kingdom and in relation to the planned broadcast on your platform X of a live conversation between a U.S. presidential candidate and yourself. So think about it. The guy in Europe in charge of enforcing a European Union law writes an American about an American company, about an American election, and he says the context for the letter, the reason for the letter are events that are happening in the UK, a non-European Union country. That's not Europe trying to influence what happens here. I don't know what is. He goes on throughout the letter and says this: measures need to be taken to combat disinformation. He told this to Mr. Musk. We're concerned about any, quote, illegal content you may have. And he ends his letter by saying, my services and I, very last sentence, my services and I will be extremely vigilant to any evidence that points to breaches of the Digital Services Act and will not hesitate to make full use of our toolbox. So he ends the letter with a threat. So before the interview even takes place, he's threatening an American running an American company about an interview regarding the most important election we have, election of the President of the United States. And again, saying the reason for doing so are events that are happening in a non-European Union country, the UK. Comments about events happening in the UK. Concerned about this, quote, spillover effect. That is why we're having today's hearing. That's why we went to Europe last month, or actually in July, to study this issue. Now, here's what's interesting. Mr. Breton, after he sends this letter, this committee sent him 2 letters, and then he suddenly resigns. We asked him to come today, but he refused to come. We asked him to send written testimony. He refused to do that. We asked him to appear. He just wouldn't come.
That this Online Safety Act expressly says, and I mentioned some of the things, it's designed to protect young viewers against violence and pornography and fraud and suicide. And again, that's designed to get people to say, oh, of course, I support that. But then they sneak the politics into that. They did that in Canada's Bill C-63 too. So you have all these well-meaning things, who could possibly disagree with them, but stuck in there, and you correct me if I'm reading this wrong, subject matter including, quote, illegal immigration and people smuggling. So you can't talk about suicide, and I can understand. Go ahead.
But if you go to the UK government's official guidelines on the Online Safety Bill, so the official government website, you'll see it's right there in bold text. I put this on my Twitter feed as well, that the act covers mis and disinformation, that it covers hate speech, that it covers all of these pretexts that are used for censoring political speech. And, you know, government ministers in the UK, when they're out doing TV interviews, they'll only talk about the child protection measures. They won't talk about what they're talking about in Parliament, where government ministers are saying, yes, this act does cover misinformation. And in fact, government ministers have even said that a key purpose of the bill is to prevent the kind of riots that were seen, the kind of public disturbances that were seen in the UK last year, because people were organizing organically to protest immigration and migrant crime and illegal immigration. That's not about protecting kids. That's about shutting down political activity. That's what they really care about.
The UK government has new legislation on the way that will allow the exclusion of convicted criminals from places such as pubs, football matches, and concerts, travel and driving restrictions, and requiring them to stay in a designated area. The law will make it possible to issue such bans for all types of offenses, the government says.
They can be happy that they are in a free country, like Finland, where the free speech is a right, where they have not any restrictions. If they would be in Moscow, they would be in jail in 2 minutes.
As they're arresting him.
What?
She said, we have free speech. Of course, no, you don't have free speech, because people in the European Union are constantly being arrested and put in prison.
In Britain, it's now illegal to shout, I love bacon, because it's offensive to Muslims, and you could be arrested.
We love bacon! Why? Because I like bacon. I say you like bacon.
So this guy is getting told not to fly his flag in a public area when you've got the pro-Hamas flag being flown, we've got the Palestine flag, all the other fascist flags that they've got going, but he's being told to go away with his England flag. In England. I mean, come on, you can't make this shit up.
But just think of the optics and the politics of this nation. You don't want to start a civil war arresting an Englishman for flying a Union Jack when there's people here literally tacitly supporting the October 7th.
And just yesterday, you'll have seen that the UK police arrested a comedian and fellow Irishman, Graham Linehan, a person I know well, for tweets about gender ideology. German pensioners are having their homes raided and are being prosecuted for insulting politicians. Indeed, one member of the Green Party in Germany has over 700 criminal complaints outstanding for insult. What's happening in Europe is, as Vice President Vance said on St. Valentine's Day in Munich, a serious retreat from a fundamental value, that of free speech. It's a sign that our European political elite has lost control of the narrative, and the Digital Services Act is the response to that, an increasingly desperate attempt to suppress growing public discontent. Why should this matter for Americans? Why should you be concerned? Because of the worldwide reach of European law, the so-called Brussels effect changes regulation in every area that the European Union chooses to regulate. And now they've entered the business of regulating speech. And they're very proud of the so-called Brussels effect when you ask them about it. This new EU law is essentially an anti-speech law. And when you read the case law of the European Court of Justice, statements from senior officials, and the provisions of the Digital Services Act, you can see everything is there to create a digital censorship industrial complex. We see a whole structure of trusted flaggers, codes of conduct on so-called hate speech and misinformation, content moderation for so-called systemic risks. Much of this is hidden in bland technocratic language in the DSA, and our written submissions go into some of the problems associated with it. But it constitutes nothing more than an attempt to bring Brussels regulation of speech onto a global stage. Furthermore, when the European Union is now negotiating trade deals, including with your neighbours to the north in Canada, they insist that the Digital Services Act is part of that. So it's very clearly a global intent. It means that the European Union will set the global standard when it comes to speech. And because of the laws that I just outlined in Europe, the type of prosecutions we're seeing, it's an extremely low standard. It draws, I would suggest to you, a digital curtain where once there was an iron curtain. And US companies bear the brunt disproportionately of this. They're hijacked by the DSA to become essentially the EU's global censorship police, whether they like it or not. The DSA contains expansive powers of investigation, huge compliance costs, and crippling fines if they're found to be non-compliant for removing so-called illegal content. Indeed, I commend your committee's report recently on showing the bias at the heart of the system.
Europe is attacking free speech around the world, including here in America. Laws like the Digital Services Act and the Online Safety Act are the engines of global censorship regime targeting political speech disfavored by European bureaucrats. The censorship mechanism is simple. The DSA and the OSA effectively require social media platforms to change their terms of service to moderate more content. These companies have one set of standards that they apply globally because it's costly, impractical, and harmful to user privacy to change content moderation rules based on a user's location. So when platforms are forced to change their terms of service to comply with European laws, it affects what we see, what we read, what we say online here in America, infringing on Americans' First Amendment rights. And this is no accident. Even the New York Times, The Atlantic have acknowledged that these foreign censorship laws are intended to have global impact. And European actions have proven it. Again, just look at Mr. Breton's letter. Supporters say these laws make the online environment safer for children, something that we all agree with. We all want to protect kids. But censorship laws are never about disinformation or child safety or anything else. They're always about censoring criticism of the government. Social media is a relatively new technology, but censorship is as old as time. Misinformation, disinformation, hate speech labels are always used by the people in power to censor their critics. And my experience has taught me that today's misinformation is tomorrow's truth. And we have seen it time and time again. I always like to point out, everything the government told us about COVID turned out to be wrong. Everything our government told us about COVID. I'm not even talking about Europe here. Everything. They told us that the virus didn't come from a lab. Sure looks like it did. They told us it wasn't gain-of-function research done at the lab. Yes, it was. They told us it wasn't our tax money used at the lab. Yes, it was. They told us vaccines. They told us that the vaccinated can't get it. They told us the vaccinated can't transmit it. They told us masks work. They told us 6 feet social distance was based on science. And they told us this was the first virus in history where there's no such thing as natural immunity. They were 0 for 8. And yet they're going to define with some disinformation governance board what we can say, what we can tweet, what we can read, what we can post. You got to be kidding me. As RFK Jr. testified before our committee, never forgot what he said. He said, when you look at history, it is never the good guys who are for censorship. It is always the bad guys, and that's our concern. We need debate. The best way to answer bad speech, wrong speech, stupid speech, crazy speech, even hate speech is more speech. We need the First Amendment. Our committee will continue to move legislation that protects free speech from threats, including threats from abroad.
I have upheld, which is no flags to be worn in the chamber until the matter has been resolved by the Procedures Committee. So I'd ask you to take the flag off.